Welcome into episode 10 of season 7 of the Drum Candy podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week, I'm interviewing the legendary UK drummer producer, Malcolm Catto. Malcolm has been a leading figure on the UK's underground funk, jazz, and psych rock scene for the past 25 plus years. He worked with jazzman Gerald on the Stark Reality record label, and he was the drummer in the classic funk band, the Soul Destroyers. Out of the Soul Destroyers, Malcolm formed the Heliocentrics, which is a really interesting hybrid jazz, psych rock, experimental world ensemble. You definitely check out their entire discography. His most recent project is a collaboration with Little Barry, a great songwriter guitarist out of the UK, and their new record is called Electric War. I caught up with Malcolm just as he's about to start producing a band coming in from the US, so he's running around getting his gear together. And we talk about everything from his start in drums and music and his general aesthetic, and just let the conversation go. We also talk about his first drum set and first snare drum. So really, really interesting and inspiring interview. So let's get to it with Malcolm Catto.
Well, basically, I've got a band coming over from the US, recording at my studio for pretty much the whole of March.
Okay.
So I'm just running around trying to get mics repaired, trying to get everything up and running. You know, it's like just before they come in, everything was working. And then I did a session last week and just everything stopped working, like the headphone mixer. And so I've been rushing around. Oh man, it's been nuts. It's always the way. That's the problem trying to run a studio on your own. Sometimes it's difficult, you know, to cover all the angles. There's amps, there's all your gear, there's and the chances are you're never going to have everything working at the same time. It's just this impossibility, you know, you realize. So yeah, I've got that. We're doing a little tour in the UK with Barry in April to promote the new album that's coming out, and yeah, bits and pieces. Got a couple of gigs with the Heliocentrics coming up as well, and just a mixing, bands coming in, usual sort of stuff really. And that's partly where I work is actually in a community centre in the middle of a housing estate in kind of it's East London. It's like right next to Dalston, which is like, yeah, Hackney, quite a trendy area, but it's a bit out the ways from that, so a bit more, yeah, residential area. But the internet there is really bad as well, so I can't do it there, and I can't get internet because I'm in the basement, so I can't get internet there either. So I thought, yeah, my home might be the best bet to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about it. Been rehearsing with Barry quite a bit, and Lou, just, you know, trying to nail all the tracks, because obviously we're trying to do the new stuff, and some of it is quite produced. A lot of it isn't, because I try not to overproduce in general, but trying to recreate that live, some of it's hard when you've produced stuff and you've gone in and done overdubs. It's like, oh my god, how are we gonna cover all of this? So yeah, we've been trying to work that out, but I think it's sounding pretty good. And you know, yeah, it'd just be nice to get more shows really.
Do you bring in other players for the show, or does it stay a trio?
Well, the budget's pretty tight, so we've for London, we're hoping to have one of the guys from the Heliocentrics who plays. He's playing the strings actually on one of the tracks on the album, and he plays cello, and he also plays keys. So it's quite good that he's a multi-instrumentalist, that he can cover a few angles, because there is quite a lot of keys on stuff from the first album and this album. So you can cover that, and you can play the strings, but that's only for the London show. And for the Manchester show, we've got a keyboard player. I think he's in the band with Liam Gallagher, and yeah, that's how Barry knows him, from playing with Liam, and they got on really well. He came to the studio and recorded some stuff, and it just works together. You know, sometimes it's a lucky one. You know, you can have like the best musicians in the world, but sometimes it doesn't always gel, and sometimes you just get random people and it just comes together. You know, it's luck, isn't it? Sometimes, I don't know. I guess it's all about how entrenchable people are, you know, musically. You know, if you can't deviate from what you do, you're in trouble sometimes, you know. I must admit, as a drummer, I have problems with that because I hear it a certain way and it's not always compatible with other musicians. Or recently I've done a thing in Milan where I played with another drummer and we didn't really get much of a rehearsal. We played a couple of hours, then we had to go on, and I was just hearing it differently from the other drummer. I don't know exactly why, but you hear a pulse, you know, and that's all I can do is play to that pulse. And he was hearing the pulse, but different, so it sounded mental. And the guy who booked me, he was like, "Oh, that was pretty strange," like, you know. But luckily, he likes a bit of Sun Ra and stuff like that, so he could handle it being a bit esoteric. But yeah, anyway,
Man,
sorry.
that brings up a point that I was just having a conversation with my duo partner about, like the idea of a pulse is a pulse, but it's not a pulse. Like, you know, like where I feel the pulse, even though we might be playing 90 BPM, it doesn't mean that we're both playing the same like attack.
Yeah,
That's been kind of blowing my mind now. I wonder if that's why there aren't many double drummer bands that really work for that reason.
well, I mean, it can be a good thing in a way. Like the way this guy was like super flash. He plays for the Italian National Orchestra and stuff like that. So he was like Mr. Chops, and I'm not. I'm self-taught, and I'm not really that interested in chops really. But you know, it would be nice to be able to do them. Like I've had to do a couple of drum solos in my life, though I hate doing it. But sometimes on a gig they'll say, "Hey, and the drummer," and everyone cut out, and you're just left there like floundering. And that's when chops would come in handy. But this guy was pretty dapper on the chops, and so we worked it out between us. Oh, you take this groove, and I'll take this on this track. Okay, it suits my style more, and then you just play around it. So he was kind of just doing stuff, yeah, just rolls and just feeling out what I was doing and just elaborating on what I was doing, I guess, which was the basic groove. But if we both tried to play the groove together, yeah, that sounded weird, definitely. But then I've got like there's a band called the Black on White Affair, like a funk band from, I guess it's 1971, Seattle, and it's incredible that record that is super heavy because I don't know what it is about Seattle and Detroit, but generally music out there can be pretty heavy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this band, I guess Hendrix is out there, Curtis Knight, and I think I'm right in saying, and these guys, yeah, I guess you call it sort of funk rock, but there's two drummers, and I didn't realize until we contacted the band to license it from them. And and it's super syncopated and swung, but it's so together that it doesn't flare. I can't hear any evidence of it being two drummers except that it's heavy. There's not a hint of flamming or anything, you know. It's just, and I guess that's the thing about growing up in the same neighborhood, same people, same music. Hey, have you heard this? You know, whereas if he was to do that with a British drummer or something, it's like a bit like another time. It kind of works quite well. It's Ginger Baker with Tony Allen on the Fella sessions from '69, is it, when he came to London? And that's quite interesting because even though obviously Ginger Baker can't play Afrobeat, nothing like what Tony Allen can. Just totally different style, but he's still got enough. I guess he smokes enough weed that he can tap into it,
Right.
and find something, and that's quite interesting. But yeah, sometimes it just, when it don't work, does it?
Yeah. Man, I just saw a classic interview with Miles. I can't remember what the show was, but they were kind of talking. The interview was kind of asking him about like racial kind of stuff. And then Miles just said something about, for whatever reason, white musicians tend to play behind. He just kind of like came out and said it. I'm like, well, what does that mean? And I started thinking about who he's played with, Tony versus someone like Shelly Manne. Like, is there some truth in that? Like, what is the meaning of that? Where's it? Is it just because of the music that we're listening to growing up? Like, where is that coming from?
Well, it's interesting because licensing stuff for Jazzman, like all the funk reissues, I got to talk to some incredible people at length. It's part of my job. And like Charles Wright from the 103rd Street Rhythm Band, people like that, producer, genius in his own right. And the forthcoming, oh God, that's a shame I can't remember his name now. It'll come back to me. But amazing guy. He produced Wilson Pickett. And I remember him saying, and I had no idea what he was talking about. He was like, well, there ain't much difference between, the black and the white stuff, really. I guess, we're hearing it a little, the one earlier than you, but that's about it. And I was like, oh, really? That's strange. And I never really thought about it. But from listening to a lot of funk and smoked my fair share of weed as well back in the day, so you soak that stuff up in a way when you just, and plus I love it. I love that stuff. It moves me. It does, it connects with me, and it gives you energy. It's a bit like the first time you hear Straight Outta Compton or Public Enemy. It's like infuses you with energy, and it's just like, wow, what is that? Well, it's the same for me with the funk stuff. I've listened to a lot of that, and I do really love it. And I guess we all did. From the Helios, we were in a band called Soul Destroyers, who were trying to kind of imitate that stuff, just because everyone we thought was doing it so badly. We thought, oh well, we might as well have a go, because we can't do worse than that. It's a bit like the punk ethic, where all these guys, like I had a band in recently in my studio who is a band that I used to love as a kid. Really interesting punk band, post-punk, whatever. They're called the Swell Maps. And he was down the studio, and I got to talk with the singer, guitarist, Jow Head. He's the only one still remaining of the original lineup. And he was saying, well, back in the day, we were really into Van de Graaff Generator. We were really into Robert Wyatt and Soft Machine, King Crimson, but we were just too crap to play. We couldn't get near that. And then the punk thing come out, and we were like, that we can do. We can, okay, that's now become an acceptable kind of form of music. We can definitely get into that and add our ingredients of that, what we're thinking, to their own take on it. And that's a bit like how we felt with the funk thing. It's like, okay, well, if that's the new norm of funk, then we can at least muster that, hopefully, and maybe take it somewhere else, because that was the one thing we had in common, that we all loved, coming from hip hop and going through all that thing, like all the crate diggers, tracking down, like the original samples of so many things, ESG, Silver Apples, whatever it is, then you discover this universe of music. I guess that was our route to discovering all this stuff that we're now into, which stretches out, endless, infinitely, leading us eventually into indigenous music, Kora records, where they're documenting African music in the 50s before they hear radio, Stockhausen, you name it. It just permeates through everything. And so, yeah, that was our common denominator, and that's our love. So we did that for a while, and that was good grounding for a rhythmic bass, for playing well as a rhythm section. So I guess it was already part of us, that what you would call sort of funk grounding was already there. And yeah, just through listening to a lot of it.
Did you play along to records? How'd you get the feel kind of in your bones?
Well, I suppose I was lucky in some ways, in that I kind of might have had a head start on some people on that, because my dad was really into New Orleans stuff, like R&B, like maybe up to the mid 60s. He never really got into the funk like so much, like the Meters, but it was like the R&B stuff. And I remember he would play, even things like what I'd say Ray Charles, Booker T and the MGs, R Mercy. And one of the things he played a lot, because he loved it, and he even tried to teach me on piano, but I was crap on piano. But he could play all that stuff, all that Barrel House, Cripple Clarence Lofton, Professor Longhair. He could actually play that really well, because, again, out of the genuine love of it. But he used to play Big Chief by Professor Longhair a lot. So that, and also New Orleans jazz. And you'd be like, oh, listen to the drums on this. Listen. And there was something about that stuff, the rawness of it. It was like they weren't maybe kind of taught, like, or hadn't really taken it to that kind of level where they'd, what you'd call sort of chopsy, but the intent of how they played it, like the energy, brought it to life, just. And that's something someone said in the studio recently to me, is had a guy from Dungan down in the studio playing with him, and he's a great guitarist, really really like what he does. And he was saying, it's not what you play, but how you play it. And it's true, it's what you bring to it. And it's like the energy of this New Orleans jazz from the 20s or 30s. This guy, it's the same as punk. He really means it. And another thing that was related to me from some of the older guys who cut the funk records back in the day, I remember one of the guys, Chucky Eatman, can't remember the band now, but I remember speaking to him, and I was just playing guitar, and he was like, no, do it again. Think it, feel it, and then play it. And I was like, oh, what are you on about? And then I played it again. He goes, yeah, you've got to mean every note. It's like, wow, that's pretty deep. Do you know what I mean? So that was an education, meeting these guys, the original guys. And I didn't really play to funk records. I mean, I sort of would play on my knees or something, but I never really had access to a kit until I set up a studio in 2000. And when was that? 2008 or something, was it?
Wow.
So I had to, I wasn't able to play drums, and I felt that was cheating a bit. Like, I know a lot of drummers who play along to funk beats until they get it. And I'm like, well, I don't actually, I love Clive Stubble. I mean, I love Clive, and I must admit, I've tried to work out some patterns in my head, like, well, just to make it sound like something, like, but I'll play on a pillow or something. I won't sit down on the drums with that on a loop, and because even though I love it, I'd love to play that, I don't want to actually be that. I mean, not that I could ever be that anyway. It's like Funky Drummer. Who's ever played that? Who's ever played that? The same as that. And they never probably will, because that's unique to him, right? Same with Jabbo Starks or countless drummers from funk records I can play you. The highlighters or whatever. They've all, that's what's so beautiful about it, is that everyone has got their own take on it. And I've got my own swing. I've got my, like, 1,000 other drummers who play or into funk drums and hip hop and a bit of jungle. And so, yeah, I've never actually tried to copy stuff, because I've never seen the point, because you never do it as good as them. But seeing ideas and hearing things like, oh, man, how does he do that? Like, there's that one clip in the James Brown live at the Boston Gardens in '68, where they, after Martin Luther King got shot, so they televised James Brown in Boston, stop the whole city being burned down in riots, because obviously people went mental. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But he's doing that thing where he's doing that cold sweat, and he's got one arm up in the air, and he's going boom, jack, tick, tick, boom, jack, tick, tick, tick. What is that? I don't know how hard he had to work to get that, but that's mind blowing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, sorry, I'm going off at a bit of a tangent.
I love it. Yeah, that was great. I mean, it's really interesting that, so, like, did you just have a natural strong pulse? I mean, do you ever have to play to a click?
I've had to play to a click. Yeah, I have had to play to a click, and that's been tricky. As for a natural pulse, what I would do, my brother plays guitar, or did. He's passed now. Same with my dad. My dad plays piano, so I would have to keep time on the, like, a knitting needles and a tobacco tin or whatever was around, and just, well, sometimes while they would just play, they were both into, yeah, I guess they're quite into their rock and roll stuff and R&B and blues. And so I just, as a kid, sometimes but I didn't really take drumming seriously for quite a while, but it seemed like it came easier to me than, say, picking up a guitar or a double bass. You know what I mean? That was hard. So what's the second part of your question again?
Just how you develop that strong pulse without playing the records or practicing to a click.
Well, no, I think the click, whenever people come down to the studio, I dissuade them from using click, because I hear drummers warming up and they've got their own style. They've got a discernible character to what they do. And then as soon as you turn that click on, they like tighten up, and all of that just goes out the window. And you can get fluent, like, playing to a click, but then what are you contributing to that? Do you know what I mean? Where is your soul? Where's your heartbeat? Like, there's countless records, funk records, African records, that where, yeah, they will slow down or they will speed up, or it's whatever suits the music, and how there's that interplay between bars where it subtly slows down for and then we'll go ahead and that's determined by what the other musicians are doing in the room. It's like a rhythmic conversation, and that's something, I guess, from playing with the Heliocentrics, where we collaborated with Orlando Julius, who was like he was the originator of Afrobeat, in that he was combining funk and R&B with African, rhythms, and I mean, he had Fella in his band playing trumpet originally. Fella, when he came back from England, from I can't remember what school of music it was he was studying, but he was studying composition at a very famous university or college or school here, and yeah, he was in Orlando Julius's band, and then Orlando Julius lent him his rhythm section to start his own band. Subsequently, yeah, he found his guys, but in that stuff, because it's like a celebration of life, literally, that it's very, very different how they perceive, seemingly to me anyway, playing with, being lucky enough to play with some of the original Fella guys and like world-class African percussionist, bass player called Emmanuel, who's a high life bass player. It's like their conception of time isn't restricted to bars. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not measured in bars and counting. It's like they're feeling it as like almost like an ongoing thing, like a river or something, just something continuous. And then they can break it down into bars. But I remember playing with Orlando, sometimes he would just let a track play for 25 minutes. If he was feeling it. And it's all about the dynamics, it's about the accents, and it's so rhythmically well put together that it's infectious, because it's question and answer. The bass line will be a question and answer, whereas if it's just a question or an answer, you will get bored with that quick. But because there's space and there is this continual question and answer between the instruments, and this continuous discussion, this talking rhythmically, like the percussionist will accent something, the drums will mimic that. It's like it's bubbling up here and there, all the time. Something new is happening and contributing to what's going on. And there's a lot more emphasis, I suppose, on the rhythmic aspect of it, because I remember also one of the guys when it was a DJ who used to be a musician, again, funk guy. I played him something from the first Heliocentrics record, which I thought was pretty funky, and he was like, "Oh no, actually, sorry, it wasn't him. It was who was it? It was a funk drummer. It'll come back to me. Oh no, it's actually James Gadsden. I played him over the phone some stuff because I was talking to him about the compilation we were doing called California Funk. So he was helping me, along with Charles Wright, to find some of the artists who maybe only just released one single. So they're quite elusive. So they were helping me track these guys down. But yeah, I played him a track from that album, and he said two things I always remember. Because I was quite pleased with it. I was like, "Oh, that's a good groove. That sounds pretty good. We're playing well there." And he said, "Yeah, man, I like that. It sounds good. But you sped up on the ninth bar. Why do you do that?" I was like, "Oh, wow. I didn't even realize you sped up on the ninth bar. And also, your percussionist is playing like straight against you. And that's just going to emphasize if it goes out. You need your percussionist to play a cross rhythm to enforce what you're doing." And that's the African thing. It's like everyone is playing a cross rhythm. It's a bit like salsa. I played with Quantic for a long time with a lot of amazing Colombian salsa players. And they were incredible. And it was again, it's like a house of cards rhythmically, but it's all cross rhythms. And if something goes out, that that whole house of cards just falls down. And I remember the pianist was called Alfredito Linares, who's done records that I actually bought from the 60s, like Descargas. Amazing player, incredible. He's just known as Maestro. That's officially his title. But he would do this thing where he was so good. He could play classical, but he was he was a salsa guy. But he would do this thing where he would take the timing so far out that I remember one time I was made the mistake of listening to him. I'm no salsa player, but I understand rhythm, I think. So I can lock into the percussion and the bass and just try and keep it together. And then I made the mistake of listening to this guy playing the piano. And I just went so far out of time that the band leader, Quantic, just had to stop the track at a show mid-track saying, no, got to start that again. This time I never listened to him again. But he would do that kind of deliberately. He'd be watching it and he would just it's like crazy rhythmic sense. But yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot in there to unpack. I'm going to be listening to this over and over again. So, putting on your like record producer hat, how do you know when that is cool versus when it's a bad take? Like, when do you know like those kind of inconsistencies are cool, or like, hey, can we tighten up and do another one?
Well, that's an interesting question for sure. I mean, I guess you have a sense when you've got the old engineer production hat on of when a band is done. When they're kind of done with a track and they want to move on, you can kind of sense that, or when they want to really nail it. And it is, every producer, engineer under the sun is the same trick, and I have the same trick, but unfortunately you can only play that card a couple of times at most. And that's the thing of just like get them to rehearse, set up the levels, whatever track they're doing, just say, hey guys, it's sounding great, can you just run through it one more time, record it. And quite often that will be the take. If you can do that, but then how do you do that 10 times in a row? You can't, you know what I mean? But it's a thing of, like in my studio, there's no clocks. I'm a musician primarily, and it's out of necessity that I put a studio together. It's along with the rest of the band, we just pulled all our resources, everything we had, because we couldn't find studios who had the sound that we wanted. And maybe if there were some, they were super expensive and we couldn't afford that. And I was doing stuff originally on like Tascam 4-track cassette. And then I progressed to a Tascam 38 reel to reel, and luckily got a little bit of money for doing a record, and I just, which was, I'm glad I did it at the time. I just put that into buying gear because I wanted to make music, and so eventually we had enough to start a studio together from what everyone bought in together, and I had a place in Tottenham, and we had 2 front rooms, and it was in an industrial estate. And yeah, we just kept it set up all the time with the mics and everything, and it was a decent sound. And that, like I say, that was 2007, 2008 that we had that. We had an old Ampex machine, but the thing was, recorded everything to tape. And that Ampex machine, that's £100. Found that in a garage, just around the corner from where I work. People didn't have, I don't know, they don't have the nostalgia, I suppose, or the knowledge that they had then. It's a bit like going to the US in the 90s and buying funk records for $5 each, because I guess it didn't have the reverence that we had for it. Same with the R&B in the 60s that we brought back to the US because we had the reverence of it. We were like, wow, Howling Wolves. And do you see what I mean? Not that I was around then, you know, well, born in the 60s later on, but I weren't a part of that original scene. Not quite that old, but so yeah, it's that thing where you're after a sound and you talk to the guys, again, producers, engineers in America. You find a funk record. You know, I used to DJ funk with hip hop, with Latin, with God knows, just everything, you know, try and mix everything together. And there's certain funk 45s that sound good, and you can play them next to hip hop, admittedly 90s hip hop, which is more my thing, if I'm honest. Or the showbiz and AG sort of stuff, and, you know, the jazz, the mad jazz horns, sort of Organized Confusion, that would be the benchmark, second album. But yeah, and you are lucky enough doing my job that I did with Joe, I can speak to the engineers of that. You know, I find them, I license the music, I find the bands, and I can ask the engineer. And it's funny, the band might not remember anything about it. Some of the bands, they would be like, oh God, was that 1975, 1980? You know, they don't. But the engineers were crazy. They were like, oh, do you remember what you used on that? I said, yeah, that's an RCA 77 on the horns. Not that I've got an RCA 7. D12 on the kick. Oh, I've got a D12 because they were around and they were still cheap, very cheap back then. So managed to find some of this stuff, you know, by a lot of it just by luck, you know, in this newspaper, which would just, it's a trades newspaper where the people buy and sell stuff. In the back you'd see, Ampex 351 and EMI preamps and EQs, $1,000. Okay, well, that sounds good. Let's get that. You know, I've got $1,000 from my record deal. I'm going to put it back into, you know, and then, did you speak to a producer? Yeah, I used a 351 on that. Oh, great. Well, I got one of them. And I got the Ampex 440, what James Brown used. That's a pretty good starting point.
Yeah.
For a good sound. Because that stuff, some of it sounds great. A lot of it, I think they were a bit limited. Like talking to some of the producers, especially the guys like maybe who worked at Atlantic and bigger studios, I remember them saying they would actually cry when they heard the records compared to the tapes. They would hear the tape and they'd be like, my God, that is amazing. We've done it. And then they get the record and they're like, almost in tears because it just doesn't represent at all sonically. And it's like us with Jazzman. When you hear the 45 and then we get the tapes, it's like, oh my God. Sometimes the press-ins, or I don't know what went wrong, but
interesting.
Well, I think some of that is because they couldn't recreate the bass frequencies because there was that thing of AM radio, right? Anything below 80 they couldn't play.
Yeah.
So that wasn't represented on the records for starters. It wasn't the bottom end, which is what we need to hear, right? In modern ears, we need that bass. But anyways, sorry, I'm going off.
Is with your studio setup, is your like drum miking signal chain kind of the same for every project that comes in, or are you still tweaking and experimenting?
Oh, you have to change for different drummers, definitely. Each drummer has a set, and I've had drummers all walks, you know, punk band 1 week, reggae, and they will tune the drums different. They'll set them up different, like tune the drum skins right down with loads of toilet paper on it, and then another guy will come tune them right up to for jazz stuff, and same with the snare. And sometimes you have to close mic, like the toms. Sometimes you can have an ambient overhead and a kick for the jazz stuff, whatever suits the music. And I think that's the same with production. Engineering's all about trying to get the best quality source material you can, right? Like mic placement and just listening, and basically, having a smaller chain of stuff that it's going through. So I tend to have the mics coming straight in the back of the desk, and although I've got tape machines, no one really uses that anymore, except for the 351, which I do at the end. If there's money in a project or they've got money for tape, I will put stuff onto tape and take the tape to a mastering studio, and that generally works better. But otherwise, I just going from the desk straight to the converter onto Pro Tools, because let's face it, there's no one who's going to be cutting an album anytime soon on an 8-track.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You know what I mean? Yeah, which is a shame, because the sound of that thing, and I've done A and Bs, literally Pro Tools. Okay, play it again, guys. Just give me a sec. Put it from the 8-track, just record it onto tape, then put the tape back onto Pro Tools, the same take, but through off of tape, and then one straight onto the computer. And it's just a magic with tape, especially with regards to bass and kick drum. It just locks it together. It's that thing where a bass player, again, one of the old cats was saying, he could let a note ring in the studio and just go boom, and if the drummer went boom, it would make him sound like he's going boom. And that's tape, and that's hard to recreate. You can do it, but that's a lot harder to recreate digitally. That's the only thing with digital, is that's a lot harder, and that's the beauty of putting it back onto tape as well, because the bass gets embedded into something. It's not so overt. It's almost like it's standing up. The bass it's like the tracks stand up on these pillars, which are the bass, but then that's inverted when you put it onto tape. It's embedded into the ground. It's got somewhere for that bass to go, because obviously with digital, it can't absorb anything like tape can. It doesn't cushion it. It's just smack on top. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. It's hard to put that into words, but I know that feeling.
Yeah, but that's the thing about having the studio, I suppose. That sometimes you can experiment, with different things and try stuff out, and then you must never stop experimenting. I don't think, because you can get stuck in a rut where, okay, I'll use the flute mic on the flute, or it's like, no, you try stuff out, and there's always probably a better way to do anything that you're doing. Generally, I think.
Hear that. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the making of Electric War. I'll tell you what I first noticed putting on. I think the album is incredible. It sent me down a rabbit hole of your entire discography, and it's a really beautiful record.
Oh, thanks.
But what was kind of striking me is it almost feels like you guys have whittled away everything but the essence of each player. Like there's no extra stuff, and it sounds like quieter. Did you track it pretty quietly?
Well, that's the thing. I've noticed that I've got a Prism Orpheus converter, and the reason why we had some other ones before, but that seems the most transparent, and that's always what I'm after. Is is that transparency. So some things aren't affecting the sound, so you're just getting the raw data of what's actually going on in the live room, with unadulterated. And I suppose the thing was, we did an album before that called Quatermass 7, and that one is kind of for me, we overproduced it. There was loads of overdubs, and yeah, I mixed it, put it onto tape, took it to mastering. They added loads more, and it just sounds. It's an interesting sound experiment, but there's something about it that does make it sound like an artifact rather than something contemporary about it. It's kind of, and again, sometimes you're at the mercy of the music, what it dictates, what it needs. Like jazz, you're going to put flange on the sax. I mean, I'm up for all that stuff, don't get me wrong, I love it, but unless it's my own gear, I would feel weird about putting sax for a fuzz pedal or something. You know, if it's heliocentric, so I can do anything I want, and yeah, I might actually try that. But generally speaking, like with most things, it's just a performance. Going back to what you're saying about when's a take is even when you think that that's the best they can do, and it might take you to get involved with that. And I do, as an engineer or producer, I'll go in and say, oh man, that's brilliant, but can we just tweak this bit? It's how, or can we change that bass line here to something, or the drum beat there or something, because it sounds a bit similar to these other tracks, or whatever it happens to be. But then, yeah, it's just the live performance so much, and sometimes it's really exciting to be in the control room, and you've just got the raw sound data just coming through the monitors, and that's essential to have good monitors and a good flat room, that you can trust the sound. That is the first thing you need. It takes a while to realize that you want fancy gear, but without that, you've got nothing to go on, But yeah, it's a good performance when you hear it. You sit back and the hairs on the back of your neck or whatever, it's like, oh my God, you're praying that something don't go wrong, like a mic don't start crackling or some weird shit happens. It's just like, oh my God, that is great. But I suppose from a production point of view, I'm always about an atmosphere, trying to create an atmosphere, trying to induce also sometimes like a dream state. I guess that's maybe taking drugs, maybe in my younger days, but I do love the psychedelic stuff when it's good. I don't like the quasi psychedelic gear, but the real psych stuff when they're not even trying to be psych, but that is part of me, like the funk is part of me, I love that, and I always try and incorporate something of that trippiness, that something's going to alter your mental state, is going to, bit like some of the shoegaze stuff does, it alters your mental state somehow. I like that sort of thing. But yeah, with that first album, I thought, yeah, okay, the sound, I'm not happy with that sound. It's a lot going on. It's kind of, but it suits it in a way, and some of it sounds good. Some of it sounds good for what it is, even though, like I say, as well, maybe it sounds a bit 60s because I put it through loads of valve gear, so it's maybe a bit overcooked, but it's got a vibe, which again is more important than in a mix, that it's got vibe. Then you can hear everything, and everything's panned correctly or how you want it, and you can hear everything clearly. That don't even matter. I've got records with one mic that have got more vibe than things recorded at Air Studios in 1978, with 24 tracks and beautifully recorded. It doesn't matter. It's just how it sounds and how it makes you feel, right?
Yep. Right.
And this album, I was quite keen on changing it up. Didn't want to repeat it. I wanted it to be kind of more timeless, and part of that was just getting Barry to believe in the songs, which are great songs, and his voice. Like, when he's got his register, when he's got soul, and that's conveyed, and there's a vulnerability about that which I love. It's not like this arrogant sort of swaggering kind of style that he's like self-conscious, and I like musicians who are self-conscious in a way, rather than this is it's easy, I can do this all day long, and that I like. So that comes across. We stripped it right back. He wasn't that keen on the idea, and he still will say, God, yeah, I'm really exposed, but that's the essence of who you are, and that's real and honest, So get a sound, capture the performance, and don't mess with it too much. Don't overproduce it. But make sure it's got a vibe. And I guess that's what I try to do with this album more. Strip it back, and hopefully, makes it less retro or something, and more kind of contemporary in that way. But it does help when you've got great songs, and I really like Barry's voice, so that does make it easier. And I think we play pretty well together. There's an excitement when we're playing that's tangible in the studio. It's like, oh, what about if you do this and I do that? Again, which is partly my job as a producer, is to get that think tank ignited amongst musicians. If I can do that and throw some ideas around, then I'll just leave. And they said, yeah, but if you go to the B flat and I stay on the D, and things like, and all this, it's like, yes, we've got it. They're interested. They're in the moment. And, the intent of how you play it, want it to be good. Like sometimes session musicians can be maybe a bit lethargic about stuff, but because they're going through the motions. But sometimes session musicians are session musicians because they do bring it as well, So, but yeah, I hope that answers that.
Was this record harder to mix because you had less to toy with? I mean, was it a more easier to mix, or is it more difficult to mix something like this where you don't want to start going crazy with post-production?
Well, I guess it's more how I would rather hear it. So in that respect, it's like, if you look at a lot of the stuff in the first album, how I originally mixed it's on the YouTube. It's all unmastered, and some of them are rough mixes, but some of them I was considering as candidates for the album. They are really stripped back compared to what went out. What is it called again? Expansions, Little Barry expansions, like the Rest in Blue. I prefer that take on it myself. But then, so yeah, I suppose I maybe got my way a little bit more with this one in some respects. But then, yeah, it's a contrast thing, isn't it? It's just that it needed the contrast to the first one. It couldn't be the same. But mix-wise, I think to be, the essence of maybe production for me is sometimes getting the best out of what you've got, and then just like, oh, these 25 guitar overdubs, bye-bye, don't need them. Because that's what people do. If it don't sound good, they just stack more and more shit on it. It's like, oh, stack that. 80 channels I've had once of audio. It's like, that's crazy. It's get the essence of it, and you like. I don't know if you're familiar with Music Concrete.
Mm.
But some of that stuff, for instance, it is all about sound manipulation and production. It's all about having a few sounds that sound amazing, like Morricone. Some of that stuff, few sounds, but they sound great. And then that will hold my attention much more than 80 channels going on.
Yeah, same.
And I guess the reason why it's quiet would be I'm a big fan of headroom. I think headroom is the listener's way into it, having that headroom there. So I always try and keep that, because I think the mastering, that's a volume thing for the mastering to do. That's not my job to get it loud, like super loud. All those records I love, I mean hip hop maybe, and jungle, dubstep or whatever. No, there's not a lot of headroom in that. But for live music, it's emotion we're dealing with. And I think that stuff suits having headroom. And that's, maybe why this album's quiet and the first one isn't. Maybe that one's louder, because I tried to keep that. Again, it's like a live thing. Like you can imagine you're in the studio with them, or us, should say. You're there, and there's nothing too much to give the game away that there's overdubs, and there isn't many overdubs actually, but like the strings we overdubbed the strings on that Creaky part one. Again, that's Danny Heliocentrics. But then you could be in the room with that if you listen to it. It's not like got phase on it, or it's not massively affected, but it suits the atmosphere of the track. What the atmosphere is again is dictating the track and the playing a mood. It suits that mood, and a lot of this album is a bit darker, I think. It is showing a different side of Barry and his songwriting, which I really like. Bit of dissonance as well, I love that.
We are at the last 5 minutes here, so I want to ask you, if we had to do a Malcolm starter kit, what is your top 5 influences and 5 most influential records?
When you say influences in respect to
drums, music, art, doesn't matter. If I want to get, a quick primer on you as the artist, drummer, musician.
Oh, okay. Well, things that influenced me most, I suppose. Well, yeah, music's obviously going to be a big thing. I'm constantly seeking musical inspiration. I do have a lot of records, and I actively seek that out, or I seek out new music on YouTube, or for hours looking for new stuff that I like. But there's something about the process of living that's a pretty big influence. How you change as a person, how you hopefully get wiser and just appreciate things, life, and just being around. And like my journey every day in the studio takes me through a park, and just like kids playing football or something, and just like the sun's out, and it's just like, oh man, actually, there's a lot of terrible things going on on the planet. It's a really fucking weird time to be alive. And but then you realize that everyone generally is after the same thing. They just want to live, and intrinsically good people. It's just governments and money and greed that corrupts. And I guess be interested to see if you won the lottery and you got $1 billion, or I got £1 billion, what would we be like in 5 years? I don't know. What would we be like?
Hey, I'll take that experiment.
Yeah, I would too, actually. But yeah, just the same as everyone else, I guess. Film, good, a bit of art, and just experiencing stuff, and being first hand in the moment, I think, is an important one. But as for music, there's certain records that have blown my mind. There's this record by Morricone. Well, it's actually by a band called the Gruppo Improvisioni, and Morricone's playing trumpet mouthpiece, called Feedback. The Feedback did have the original of that, but again, it's an expensive record. Bought it for 30 quid years ago. Sold it quite a lot of dough, and put that towards a holiday for my family. I've only got my wife Fabi and my son Milo. That's living.
Nice.
I'd rather do that than have an expensive record. It's like, well, let's try and go somewhere. Let's go to Morocco. We haven't been there, even just a couple of nights. It's crazy. Just that experience. It's like there's this record by what was, well, at the time, Paul Revere and the Raiders. They've done an album where they just invited loads of people down to a studio for a jam, and the band's called Joyride. The band's called Joyride, I believe, and the album's called Friend Sound, or the other way around. And there's a track on there which for me is like, I tried to contact the guy, the guy who produced it, but I think there's a couple of people who are mixing it live on the desk. It's called Lost Angel Proper Street Part 2, and that is just like a trip. You listen to what they're doing on that, and it's beyond belief, that track. I don't know how they did it to this day. That's 1968, 69. It's crazy. So that, I think, is a big influence. But yeah, musically, post-punk, psych, contemporary classical, funk, soul, blues, it's all in there, pretty much everything. There's, at its best, there's great stuff in every single genre. When it's done well, and it's meant, and it's, people aren't trying to be a star or whatever, there's, every genre's got some cool stuff in it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I like to end my interviews with a nostalgic question. What was your first snare drum and or drum kit, and do you still have it?
Well, my first ever drum kit was, my brother had a post-punk band in the 80s, and he had a mate from school who was his drummer, who left, didn't want to do it no more. So, and he had a Max Wing Pearl kit that he had bought, and I begged my dad to get it for me. And so my dad bought this kit for me so I could play with my brother's band, which I'd always wanted to do, to be honest, even though I was too young to be able to do it, and I never played drums in my life. But I've been to the rehearsals, I saw what they did, I knew the songs, saw what the drummer did. He was a good drummer. And so my dad, managed to get it for cheap because the guy didn't want to know anymore. So I had this Maximum Pearl. I don't know what the make of the snare was. It just came with the kit. And I played with my brother's band for a bit. And then as I started looking into music more outside of punk and what my dad was listening to, the jazz and the R&B, and and started getting into other stuff, I swapped that drum kit with someone who had an old jazz drum kit that they had been given by some guy who found it in their attic or something, and he was a drummer and he didn't like the sound of it. So I got this old vintage, I think it's Premier. Yeah, I think it might have been an old Premier drum kit, but it was quite a good one. Again, the snare, I think, was just Premier. But it was a jazz. It was the first kit that I got, And I was young. I was like 15, 16, something like that. And I just loved the sound of that. It's just a jazz kit, you know. It just had, but the thing was, it was musical. Even though it's got only the two toms, a mounted and a floor tom, there's something about it that it just had a musicality, which is Pearl kit didn't have, you know. It's just like, oh, there's not something, it's not quite right, this Pearl kit. It don't sound great. And then I got on this, and he had some nice cymbals with it. It's just like, wow, that sounds great. It just sounds inspiring to play, you know what I mean? As a drummer.
Yeah.
And that, so like the drum kit I got now, I bought, again, that's like 80s, 89 or something. I bought that, and I've had it all these years. It's the same kit. It's just, you know, it looks completely massacred, but it sounds good, you know. I think it's got a good sound, so I don't change it. I don't need to, you know. But yeah, that I haven't got that Pearl kit anymore. I left that beautiful jazz kit around the band's house, and I'd left to join another band, and they smashed it up.
Oh shit!
So when I contacted them, out of anger that I'd left them to join some mates.
You're kidding me. That's heartbreaking.
It's a bit of a shame, because I'd moved from Stevenage, where I was born, to London. I met a girl up there, and I joined a band in London, and I was like, sorry guys, look, I'm leaving. And then I, you know, got the courage to ask about the kit. You know, it's like 6 months later, hey guys, any news on that drum kit? Yeah, we smashed it up. Ah, okay.
Damn, that's punk.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's a shame. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they're still there and they sold it or something. I don't know, but it's a shame, because that was a nice kit. But
well,
that's one. Yeah, I was just going to say, that's probably the one bargain you can still get is a Premier kit. They're actually pretty good, you know, for cheap.
True.
For the price.
True. Are there a lot over there? Because over here they're a bit more rare.
It's getting hard now.
Mm.
In fact, I think it was Olympic Premier, so it was a combination of Olympic and Premier that made it a bit slightly better than just a straight Premier kit, you know. But yeah, I know someone who's picked one up recently, and they swear by it, you know. It's interesting, lastly, that I don't even know what make my drum kit is. I was just going past a shop, and they had it outside their shop. They had it in their basement, and they were doing a clear out. And I said, oh, what are you doing with that drum kit? And it was just the floor tom and kick drum, you know. But I said, don't know, do you want it? I was like, yeah, okay. All right, gives 80 quid, you can have it, you know. And so, all right, took some money out and got that. And still, to this day, got no idea what make it is. It's strange, even though people have repaired bits of it and they've had it, and they're like, oh, interesting lugs. So, anyway.
Probably some random Japanese kit, maybe? No.
Yes, I think it might be. Because the only thing, bit of information on there's no name or anything, but on one of the skins on the front, oh yeah, it had Yamaha written on it. So yeah, definitely Japanese, that.
And that's it for this week's episode, and that is it for this season of the Drum Candy Podcast. I can't thank you enough for tuning in each week and listening and subscribing and giving us some follows and reviews and everything you've been doing, reaching out on the Drum Candy Podcast at gmail.com for ideas. Your feedback is always welcomed. We're going to take a couple weeks off to regroup, start building up our shootouts. We're doing some more hoop stuff and some drum heads, so we've got a lot on the table. Thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed the show, and take the next couple of weeks, go back, listen to some past episodes that maybe you skipped over. I know there's a lot of those early interviews that I refer back to every once in a while, and I'm always learning something new from these folks. So once again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next season.